Well, thank you, Dr. Hahn, for introducing me there, and I really appreciate the organizers giving us the opportunity to come down here and present again. It's always a great learning experience to come down here and see what new things are happening with TCD and some of the other pests that we're dealing with here. Today I'm going to talk about our TCD survey and some of the regulations. I'll just touch briefly on the regulations and go more in depth on the survey. As was mentioned, I'm a nursery inspector with the Department of Natural Resources in Indiana. That's one of my main it's mainly my job description, but I also manage and coordinate the TCD survey as well as ALB survey in Indiana. So I've kind of inherited that, and it's been a very rewarding project, but it's also very challenging as well. So. First off, I think a lot of you have seen this map. It's basically showing where walnut is native and where it's most concentrated at in the eastern half of the United States. And as you can see there in Indiana, the southeastern portion of the state has quite a bit of walnut, and that's right along the Ohio border. About 17 miles inside Ohio is where they found 1,000 Cankers disease there in the Hamilton area. We also have quite a bit going up through west central Indiana and then following the river valleys, especially the Wabash River, going up through north central Indiana up to northeastern Indiana. Indiana is about the number 3 walnut producer in the state. We put out about 17 million board feet of walnut every year. It's worth about $21 million, so that's quite a big chunk of change. And it's been estimated there's about 31.5 million walnut trees in Indiana, but that's not including plantations and tree improvement in urban areas. So there's quite a bit more than that 31.5 million. So it would be a pretty significant loss to our state if walnut were to become infested with TCD in Indiana. So as far as your regulations, this is what we're regulating in the state. Obviously the walnut twig beetle and Geosmithia morbida is on our list. As well as any of the following items that are originating from or transiting through any of the regulated states, and that includes any firewood of non-coniferous species, plants and plant parts of walnut, including the scion wood, the bud wood, any kind of nursery stock, green lumber with or without bark, and other parts, whether living or dead, such as logs, stumps, roots, branches, and chips. Any of the exempted parts include the nuts, the nut meats, the hulls, and any processed lumber or finished wood product, instruments, furniture, and things like that. So that's what we're regulating in Indiana. And how do people move products into Indiana from a regulated state? Well, the first thing that they're going to have to do is get a compliance agreement with the state of Indiana. Basically, they will contact us. They'll tell us that they're receiving walnut from a regulated state. We'll come out, we'll issue them a compliance agreement, and they keep a copy of that compliance agreement in their vehicle while it's in transit. We also require them to have the articles inspected at the point of origin, and that should be done by one of the state officials from the state of origin, as well as a phytosanitary certificate certifying the origin to the stump, if possible. That way, if a log does turn up in Indiana that does have TCD in it, we can trace it right back to where the log was cut, instead of possibly to a consolidation yard where everything gets mixed together. We know exactly where that log came from. Before they can bring that log into Indiana, they need to notify us within 24 hours. So that we know it's coming, and then we arrange our schedule so that we can come out and take a look at the logs for any evidence of TCD, whether it be galleries or cankers. And then once we've inspected them, we will release them to be sawn up or moved on to other mills if that's the case. This rule also applies to any non-infested state where the logs would come through an infested state, and looks like I forgot to put North Carolina on there, but North Carolina would be included on that as well. Any log coming through any one of the infested states or from out west this regulation would also apply to them. So moving on to our surveys. This year we've done 4 surveys for TCD. We conducted a windshield survey. We also conducted a survey utilizing our gypsy moth trappers out in the field, as well as we had 2 trapping surveys. And the reason we had 2 trapping surveys was because last year, when we received our Farm Bill funding, we actually wrote a grant, or wrote a narrative for the Farm Bill, but we didn't receive the grant funding until July. And we had written into that grant that we were going to do a spring and fall survey, but by the time we got the grant funding, the spring survey was done. So we had to adjust that and do a fall 2012 and a spring 2013 survey. And then, of course, the 2013 Farm Bill came out, and we wrote a grant for a 2013 survey. So we ended up having 2 surveys this year, which was logistically challenging somewhat, having to have our trappers separate 12 survey samples from 13 survey samples. But they did a really good job of keeping everything separated, and it's worked out fairly well. So I think with our future surveys, it's going to be a lot easier on us. So. For the windshield survey, what we ended up doing was we have 10 inspectors in our division, and each inspector chose a city within their territory where we would go out. We would take a laptop computer with GeoLink, with a GeoLink program in it, and we would collect data on 9 walnut trees per square mile within the municipal boundaries of that city. And we did this during the winter months where we could easily see the walnut trees. We would take that data and we would put it into ArcGIS, where we would create maps so that when summertime came around, those inspectors could go back and evaluate these trees for symptoms that might be consistent with TCD. We collected data on 673 black walnut trees in the 10 cities that we surveyed, and we had 3 butternut trees that did turn up, which is not a real common tree in Indiana, but we did have those turn up. We've done this survey 2 years in a row, and since then we've collected data on 1,435 trees. So we've got quite a bit of data on walnut trees in some of our urban areas. For 2013, these are the cities that we had chosen throughout the state. And again, these are all within each inspector's territory throughout the state. And we tried to choose, if you remember seeing the map earlier where the walnut was mostly concentrated, we tried to choose cities within that area. If we start getting up into northwestern Indiana, where the soils are a lot different, and it's flatter and it's a lot more prairie ground, we don't have a lot of walnut up in that area. Surprisingly, Knox, Indiana, which is up in northwestern Indiana, it's only about a town with about 4,000 or 5,000 people in it, had a lot more walnut trees than Jasper, Indiana, down in the south, which is a city probably 3 times the size. Knox had probably 3 times more trees in it than Jasper did, which was really kind of surprising. But this is kind of how we broke down our maps. This is our overview map of the Knox area. And the magenta lines are our 1 mile grid. The blue outline is our municipal boundary. And then, of course, the green trees represent the trees that we selected when we did the survey. And then, of course, the orange tree, we also had this survey set up to detect other pests. So we had emerald ash borer in there. We also had AOB as an option to choose. And the orange trees in these maps, which one? Oops, I think I broke it. There we go. The orange tree here and here, these represent ash trees because this town had no previous finds of emerald ash borer in it. So we went ahead and marked those locations too, so that the surveyor could go back and note those for future reference. And here's more of a close-up of one of those maps. Down here we have our inset map showing spatially where we're located at up here. And then, of course, we have a legend here describing each walnut tree within this 1 mile grid so that the inspector, if it was behind a house or what house it was located at, they would know exactly where it was at. For our gypsy moth trapper visual survey, what we did with this was we had the gypsy moth trappers, while they are out tending their traps, just stand at the point of where the trap was and look around to see if there was a walnut tree there. Whether it was healthy or whether it was unhealthy, they took data on it. And then what we ended up doing is we went through the paperwork, we found the trees that had multiple symptoms that were consistent with what TCD might show. And then we recreated maps for our inspectors to go out and evaluate more closely to see if they had were potentially trees that had 1,000 Cankers disease in it. For this year, there was data collected on 1,526 trees, and 101 of those trees had some symptoms that had multiple symptoms, maybe yellowing and some dead branches or yellowing with some flagging. So we had 101 of those trees that had multiple symptoms that we ended up going out to visit. After our inspectors went out to look at those trees, we felt that really none of them had symptoms that were really exactly consistent with what TCD, but we are going to monitor those for the future to see how things might develop in them. We have done this survey for the last 3 years, and so far with this survey we've collected data on 3,701 trees, and 289 trees were evaluated by our division over the course of this survey. For 2013, here's a map showing all the trees that were surveyed for this gypsy moth trapper survey. The orange trees are the ones that were symptomatic, if you will, and it's kind of the gypsy moth trappers. They don't have quite the experience as some of our division inspectors, and so when they go out and look at a tree, they may see something a little bit different than what we see. But we seem to have quite a large concentration of trees over here along the Ohio border, which is somewhat of concern considering that Butler County is just right down in here. But after visiting those trees, our inspector in that area felt like that those trees were not exactly consistent with some of the symptoms, but like I said, we will continue to monitor those in the future. And here's a map showing all of the trees that we've surveyed over the last 3 years. The magenta colored is 2011, the green is 2012, and the orange are the 2013 trees. So we've got quite a bit of data on our walnut locations and also what kind of conditions some of those trees are in. For our spring 2013 segment of the 2012 trapping survey, and that gets a little bit confusing, but again, we had 101 traps set throughout the state, and we had at least one trap set in each county. And traps were mostly set in city and county parks. We also utilized sawmills, fairgrounds, nature preserves, cemeteries, just about anywhere that there was concentrations of walnut located. We deployed those traps in late April, and they were pulled in July, and then they were monitored every 2 weeks. For this survey, which we just finished up sorting all the samples about 2 months ago, we had about 400 samples with about 1,209 insects being sent in for identification. That doesn't mean we had 1,209 very suspicious bark beetles. We also sent in longhorn beetles and buprestids just to get an idea of what kind of other pests that we've got going on out there. But there were quite a bit of bark beetles in some of these, and we did have a few that did have pronodal ridges and were very similar to walnut twig beetle. My guess is they probably weren't, because a lot of them, upon looking at them through a microscope, didn't have the asperites that crossed over. They usually came together, and but we'll let Purdue do the identification. So hopefully they come back negative. Here's our locations of our traps for the 2012 survey, for the spring segment of that survey. The yellow cross, the crosses on there are traps that we had to relocate because of vandalism from the previous fall. We did have some traps that ended up disappearing or ended up being thrown in rivers or creeks or were the poles were bent or something. So we decided to relocate those to a different spot. We did have a few that were still vandalized even in the spring, but not near as many as we did in the fall. For our 2013 trapping survey, we had 75 funnel traps placed at high-risk sites throughout the state, and we changed this up a little bit for the 2013 survey based on the fact that the lure will only draw from maybe a maximum of 100 feet or so. So we decided on some of our more high-risk areas, like some of our veneer mills and some of our other log yards, to concentrate some of these traps around some of those areas that were much more high risk, and some campgrounds as well that might have had larger areas that would draw in more people. We also had 18 traps along the Ohio border, stretched from I-74 right along the Ohio border and about 18 miles north of there to a small town called Scipio, Indiana. We had actually 9 miles north of there. We had 18 traps on a half-mile grid spacing. And again, those traps were deployed about the same time as the 2012 survey in late April, but they were left out all summer long, and we just pulled those traps in late October. We had about 961 samples that we collected from those, and we're still in the process of sorting through those. We're about 2/3 of the way done with those. So we got quite a bit of work ahead of us, but we can see the light at the end of the tunnel at this point. Here is the map showing where our 2013 trap locations are. And again, here's the Ohio border traps right here. And again, right about in here is where Hamilton is, and where they found that. It's about 17 miles in from the state line. And then, of course, some of these areas here, we had 5 traps at a lot of these locations because we have several mills in this area. And this is one of the state park up here is Pokagon State Park. And last spring, when we first did our Thousand Cankers Disease survey, we had a yellow sticky trap set up at this state park, and we caught a whole bunch of Pityopteris laudus on that sticky trap. So we set some more there this year, and we didn't catch nearly as many this year as we did last year. They went into that state park during last summer, and they did a timber sale in there for all the ash, because there was a lot of ash up in here. And when they did that, they cut some in the area that we caught all those Pityopteris laudus, which also had a lot of redbud in it, which is one of the hosts for Pityopteris laudus. And so I think that kind of might have had something to do with maybe a reduction in population, where they also took out some of the redbud as well, in order to get some of the ash logs out of there. But some of these other areas up in here are campgrounds. Like this is Indiana Beach, which is an amusement park, which has a lot of campgrounds in that area. But again, some of these other areas are a lot of veneer mills right in here. And actually, this site down here was a veneer mill that received walnut material from California in the past. They're actually out of business now, and I think they were actually one of the competitors of the site here. But so far we haven't caught any walnut twig beetle at that site, so we're hopeful that we don't have it in the state, although I think it's probably going to, if it's going to come in, it's probably going to come in right here. This is showing the traps right along our Ohio border, and again, here's I-74 in Dearborn County, and then it stretches all the way up here. It's a little town of Scipio up here, so we got 18 traps along here. Once we start getting up into this area, the landscape changes quite a bit. It's a lot of ridge and valley down in through here, where the streams have cut down through. But up in here, it's a lot more farmland, so we start running out of some trees up in here. But again, right in this area is probably due west of where they found walnut twig beetle in Geosmithia in Ohio. So what's ahead for 2014? Well, we will continue to inspect walnut logs entering Indiana from regulated areas and that are traveling through regulated areas. We will conduct another set of windshield surveys in another 10 cities, which we'll probably start that next month, or in February. We'll start getting on that. We'll continue to have gypsy moth trappers collect data while they're out on walnut trees that are around the trapping sites there, and we'll go out and evaluate any symptomatic trees. One other thing we're going to do is continue to monitor suspicious trees from previous surveys, and we'll continue to do that as long as we need to. And again, we're going to continue with the trapping surveys, and we're going to concentrate again on our high-risk sites. We'll probably do some expanding of the trapping along the Ohio border and maybe go a little bit farther south, maybe down into Lawrenceburg or Aurora. And another thing I think we're going to try to do is place some traps near some of our suspect trees that we've been monitoring from the walnut, from the gypsy moth survey, as well as some of our windshield surveys. And then we'll also look at possibly placing some traps at some of the mills and log yards that we've caught other Pityoptera species at. So I thank you for your time. Does anybody have any questions?